Hello, everybody. Welcome to Inside Policy Talks, the in-house podcast of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm Aaron Wudrick. I'm the director of the domestic policy program here at MLI, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Sydney Greenspoon. She is a law student in her final year at the University of Windsor, and I know the experience you're going through right now, Sydney, and not the one we're going to talk about, but studying for the bar. Which is the last big step at law school. So I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your studying to talk to us about something less fun but necessary, and it has to do with anti-Semitism on campus. You recently wrote an op-ed that got quite a bit of attention in the Times of Israel. So I wanted to have you on to talk a little bit about experience. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the unfortunate experience you've been having lately at the University of Windsor?
Sure. Thank you for having me, first off. Yeah, so I think that for us at the University of Windsor, um, kind of started off like most other Jewish students on October 7th when we were sort of watching everything unfold. The first thing I knew we needed to do was make a statement. I served as co-president of Windsor's Jewish Students Association, which is the only Jewish representation we have in the entire university. So we knew it was our role to make a statement of solidarity with Israelis and the Jewish and non-Jewish people who were murdered by Hamas on that day, which we did probably in the span of a couple hours. And almost immediately, we were told from our student law society that we needed to remove it because it was distressing to the wider law school community. And at the same time, they sent a mass email to over 60 of my peers saying that as of, immediately a new rule will be enacted where no politicized posts can be posted on social media. And I don't think anyone who received that email was blind to the fact that it was about us. No
And,
one's
and
social
that
media.
rule, just to be clear, that rule just arose spontaneously on October 7th after you
Yeah,
made that statement. I see.
yeah. And especially for us, like a bunch of Jewish students who were observing Shabbat, they actually, by the time Shabbat was over, that's when we got the email. Like it was it was a weird timing with everything, but it was just like the day hadn't even ended. The blood wasn't even dry in the kibbutzes ransacked by Hamas when we get this email. We get a mass email where I probably got almost 60 texts from my friends saying, "Is this about you guys?" Because what political event happened that day, everyone knew.
Yeah.
And for us, it felt like they rendered down our grief to a politicized post, when
Yes.
at that point, it really wasn't political. It wasn't about one side retaliating. It was we were
Sure.
in grief and we needed
Right.
our campus community to be there for us.
Yeah, and even
And
even if it was politics, I mean, it's a university. I would argue that universities are places where a lot of politics occur, and I think there's a distinction to be made between universities as institutions taking positions and people and sub-organizations at universities having opinions and sharing those opinions about things.
that we found that ironic as well. We're in law school. We talk about these things. I took international law during all
Mhm.
this. Like we talk about politicized issues all the time. I had friends reach out to me and on their club social media accounts, they were like, "We spoke out about against the Iranian regime last year. Nobody said anything. We
Mhm.
spoke out about this. We talked about this political issue. No one said anything." So it wasn't blind to the Jewish, non-Jewish people that it was about us.
Mhm.
Um, I think at that moment we were like in fight or flight mode, and we like the next day like instantly went into action and went to our policies and bylaws of how they function these
Sure.
societies. Because I was like, I don't know, it feels overbearing for them to have this ability to say what we can post on social media.
Right.
So they couldn't after reading their bylaws and everything, and we sent them a very long worded email and actually broke down our statement to prove how it's actually not political at all. That standing against terrorism isn't political
Mm.
and standing with Jewish students isn't political.
And what was
And,
the response?
we didn't hear from them for a while.
Mm.
We also let them know we refused to take it down.
Mhm.
It's still there to this day.
Mhm.
Um, they let us know about, like, 5 days later. They sent a mass email saying that the law was revoked that they made, the new rule, and they basically sent us a personal email to reference that email. So, no, like, "I'm sorry," even, no empathy, like, no point to any of the substance of what we were saying in our email, just sort of, "Okay." I think they probably saw that it was o outside of their constitution, and
Sure.
I'm not sure they saw the other issues with why, in
Right.
my opinion, why it was wrong.
Right, right.
But yeah, I think since then, that's when things have kind of blown up for us. I think that the first day it blew up for us, and
Yeah.
then that was like a foreshadowing to the next rest of my law school career.
Well, and that's kind of what I want to understand what's happened next. I mean, you published your op-ed recently. Months had
Mhm,
sort of passed in between October. What had your experience been sort of over the rest of the school
mhm.
year, whether as a result of the statement that your organization made, or just generally as a Jewish student on campus?
Yeah, so I think since then it's been very tough to be a Jewish student on campus.
Mm,
I We chronically are telling students if there's gonna be security or not at our events. We have to hide our events on campus. We had, a Canadian Nova survivor come speak and tell his story. The amount of precautions we have to put in place in order to have a nice experience for our students
mhm,
is beyond me, and the pushback we get from trying to do anything on campus, um, I think then, like, things have just blown up. On a weekly basis, we're
mhm,
having,
mhm.
I quote, "freedom of speech for Palestinian" events on campus that directly say that Zionists can't speak on campus. So
Mm.
it's allowing
Free,
one group to freedom of speech, but the other group can't have any freedom of
so a
speech.
free speech event that is about restricting the speech of other people.
Essentially, and I
I
went to
see.
the event, that event specifically on freedom of speech. It's curious because if you're talking about freedom of speech for Palestinians, I stand by freedom of speech for all groups on campus. This is
Mhm.
a university academic environment. We need to have dialogue and conversations to get through
Sure.
any of this. And I love a friendly debate, especially about a topic I'm passionate about.
Mhm.
We went to this event and the whole time they were distorting the rule of law. That they were saying that, for example, the vandalizing of Indigo, they were saying that that was justified because Heather Reisman is a Zionist. But there's no legal law that says you can go to court and say that if someone's a Zionist, you can ruin their property.
Yeah,
That's not
yeah.
a defense.
The political views of the owner of property is not a defense against vandalism. But
Yeah, and that in those moments, I think it's scary because you're talking to a room of future lawyers, law
mhm,
students. It's a panel of lawyers, and these are the people teaching me how to be a lawyer. How do I
yeah,
trust that anything is objective? And they made it very clear they have no ability to be objective. In this meeting, one professor made it very clear he does not allow Zionists in his classroom, and he teaches a mandatory class in law school. So he told a story about how he kicked a Jewish student out of his class and said he said, "I hope I don't see you again," because he was talking about Israel in administrative law. And if you know anything about administrative law, you would know that it is completely irrelevant. And I can see where it has value. I took international law. That is a place where we talk about Israel and Palestine, and we talk about it in the confines of international law. But
right,
these professors will divert from their curriculum and their syllabuses before you take the class, and then make Jewish students uncomfortable and forced to drop their class.
right, right.
And I think that the professors have it seeped into the students
Yes.
because when I walk in the hallways at school, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm not one to say that often, like, I'm always wearing my Magen David, I don't that is not something that bothers me,
Mhm,
but it's uncomfortable. Students are staring at me. I have had students ask me if I'm that Jewish president of the club. Oh, because someone else is asking me. So it's like people are always, I feel like, looking at you and targeting you,
sure.
and a lot of my friends just stopped speaking to me after October 7th before I would even say my opinion
Yeah,
on it. Um, and it's just a shame because I think that I've tried to have a lot of positive dialogue, and I think that
yeah,
that's people should hear the Jewish perspective as much as they should hear a Palestinian's perspective. Like, we need to have all the perspectives in a university,
yeah,
but people don't want to hear our perspective because our professors, and I guess by the inaction of the university administration, are condoning all of this. They've said that Zionists are racist and Zionists are genocide committers, right? So when I say I'm a Zionist, now these students don't want to speak to me anymore.
right.
And it's difficult for me to actually have a place on campus to speak. That's actually why I decided to write the article, because all of these scenarios were happening and we would do exactly what we're supposed to do in a university. We'd email the president of the school, we'd email the VP of equity and diversity, we'd meet with them, and they'd basically tell us it was freedom of speech, or
Right.
that clubs on the campus, they don't really control that. The Palestinian Solidarity Group on October 10th held a celebration rally for the Day of Resistance, that in the posters had Hamas paragliders on them. So 3 days after the
Mhm.
Hamas massacre, they were celebrating. and I was told that nothing would be done. So that was really the point where I knew that my university administration wasn't gonna help us,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I wanted to ask you because I think a lot of Canadians now seeing in the news headlines, I mean, they're seeing what has happened on campuses, so they sort of got a vague idea of it. But you've lived through it firsthand, and you've written extensively about your experience. I wanted to ask whether you were surprised, like if someone had told you before October 7th that it would be like this, like it's been since October 7th. Like, has it surprised you in retrospect? Did you should it not have been a surprise if it was? I'm curious as to your
Yeah.
reflections on that.
So for me, I've been on university campuses for 7 years. So I did my undergrad at Western as well. And I feel like slowly I've watched I don't think it started on October 7th. I think it exploded on October 7th and the
Mm,
masks came off of people who are very anti-Semitic and were like, it's my time to shine. But I watched for 7 years it go down. So I remember even in my undergrad, I wrote an essay in a class about how the new form of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. And even before I wrote it, I spoke to my professor, and she was like, "If you have evidence to back it up, it's an essay. I can't tell you what to write about. I'm giving you an open topic," and I got a great mark. There was no fear that that was a crazy thing to say.
mm,
Probably, I think I wrote it in around 2018.
mm-hmm.
Now I think I would never write this essay now in fear of getting a bad grade.
I
And so
see.
I've seen this progression, and it's always been there. I've had other scenarios where I did my undergrad in social work, so that's they have the schools of social work have an ingrained anti-Semitism problem that's obviously come out more now, but I've always felt that that was the case, where I was, like, basically pulled out of the class for talking about Israel because somebody asked me a question about it during one of my
Right.
presentations, so it's always been there. I think
Right.
it was more sporadic is what I will say, and I think that if you ask I on October 7th, I remember saying to my co-president, "This is gonna be bad. When there's a war, it's bad
Yeah.
because it's bad for us in the
Sure.
diaspora," but I could have never predicted it to be at this level.
I'm curious because there's a debate right now too about. I think most people will concede anti-Semitism is, far
Mhm.
greater today than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Certainly out in the open more than it was then. And there's been a debate over what caused this. Is it being led from inside the university and elites with professors who have those views? Is it students and the makeup of the like migration to Canada? In your view, like who are the is it a reinforcing dynamic like on campus, is
Mm,
it more professors or students or both, or like what in your view,
yeah.
like what is leading the charge here on this growth of anti-Semitism?
I mean, I can only speak for, I guess, like,
Of
my
course.
university campus, but in my opinion, I really believe it's coming from the professors
Mm,
because especially in the law schools, I think the professors hold a lot of weight. They have a big following on social media as a professor of law, right? And we've always had at my school at the University of Windsor a group of professors who were very problematic and anti-Semitic, where Jewish students were aware not to take their classes.
I see.
So it was these professors that, after October 7th, have been putting on weekly events, participating in the die-ins in the middle of the law school building, and I think encouraging students. I mean, I think about if I was a student who knew nothing and my professors were saying this, and
Right.
I heard about this a couple other Jewish students who were against it. I think I would take the professor's side. They hold
Sure.
value in the classroom.
So they're
And
sort of giving license to the anti-Semitism by sort of saying that it's okay and sort of pushing the envelope on these things, so you think that that's
I think, yeah, and I think
mm,
that it's what I like to say is I would hope almost, but I
mm,
used to say more at the beginning. There was a loud vocal minority of people who are genuinely anti-Semitic, and then a lot of people who aren't using their critical thinking skills.
mhm,
And so, unfortunately, I'd love to say that those people not using their critical thinking skills still aren't anti-Semitic, but now it's been 7 months. You've had the time to do your research. You've had the time to see what you're saying is incorrect, and you haven't decided to do that, like, to get that critical thinking piece, then I
mm,
you might be anti-Semitic, unfortunately. But I think that it comes from a lot of people who don't know. And I think that I almost get along better with people and I can have more eye to eye conversations with people who are Palestinian
mhm,
because there's not the extra and that's what we can agree on, that the people who are not involved, who've just like kind of latched on to these movements
right.
are not benefiting either side. And
Mm,
I think that it's when there are strong allies on both sides, it's really important, but it's people who are using their critical thinking skills and actually looking at both sides and seeing what they do and don't agree with. It's much more nuanced than saying, "I'm pro-Israel, I'm pro-Palestinian." I would say I'm pro-Palestinian too.
yeah.
I mean, I don't think other people would agree, but
Well, it's interesting because I want to put to you because there's this the other debate is what is the line on free speech, right? Like for example, what in your view would be an example of something that would be considered fair ball as a legitimate criticism, for example, of Israel foreign policy versus anti-Semitism? Like
right.
I wonder if you could come up with an example because as you say, you seem to welcome these debates, and I think we can agree that on campus, students don't have a right to never be uncomfortable, but if it crosses the line into
Yeah,
harassment and sort of intimidation, now we're at a point where you may be violating the law. So
yeah.
I don't know if you've thought about where that line might be, or what would be in your view, as someone who's a proud Zionist, you would consider legitimate
Mhm.
protest that you disagree with, but that is not anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a great starting point is to do what our Canadian government did, and is to look at the IHRA, so the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. This definition is also, so my school's in Ontario, it's adopted by the Ontario government as well, and the federal government in 2019. So this actually gives you examples of what is anti-Semitism.
Mm,
And I sh and 90% of the Jewish world stand by this definition of anti-Semitism because it gives you these clear guidelines, and I think that's a big issue is people don't know what is an anti-Semitic, and there's no guidelines to show
right.
you, but and so in my opinion, I believe that the protests that were held on campus are fine. Maybe not exactly everything they're saying. I don't agree with screaming "Globalize the Intifada,"
Sure.
because the Intifada to me is a time when my people were 1,400 of my people were murdered in the early
Yes.
2000s, and my own family members were murdered in the Intifada. So that I don't agree with, but I think that you have a right to protest on
Right.
university campuses. Where I draw the line for protests is inside the law building. So,
Right.
this was in the middle of the law building where professors were now unable to teach and had to stop their lectures,
Sure.
where it was you were forced to listen. So, when their protests are outside, I can remove myself. We can tell Jewish students, "If you're uncomfortable, just remove yourself." You were forced to listen to this in the middle of the law school. And when we brought it up to administration, they were told they don't have a policy, and if you can use a blowhorn in the
Right.
middle of the
Inside a
law
building.
building.
Mhm,
Right,
mhm.
so that's to me I mean, that's not necessarily this free speech aspect of it, but I think that that's where the protests draw the line. But in terms of free speech, I think that IHRA gives such a good guideline to knowing when you can what you can and can't say, and you're allowed to criticize Israel. I think
Yes.
the m I don't know who criticizes Israel more than Jews and Israelis.
Right.
And, like, that's I you're allowed to talk about you don't like Bibi Netanyahu, you don't like the settlements, one state, two-state solution. These are, like, the most classic conversations at a Jewish Shabbat dinner, and you get in the biggest arguments, but I no one asks me that.
Right,
They're
right.
asking me to defend Israel's right to exist,
Yes. Yeah,
and
very
then
different thing.
and to me, when I have debates, I understand that I would like to say my line is that I believe Israel's right to exist, and if you don't, it's really difficult to have this conversation, but I'll still debate. It's when people bring up the Holocaust that I'm out. It's when people bring in anti-Semitic rhetoric that I'm out. It's when they start bringing in these notions, like, I had a conversation with somebody and they said, "But the Holocaust wasn't our fault." And nobody was talking about the Holocaust. And I was like,
Right.
"Why would you bring that up?"
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's,
I'm happy to debate on sort of the hot topics, right? Like the
sure.
apartheid and the genocide or not, or all these sort of buzzwords flying around. I think it's when they import anti-Semitic statements or this double standard of why am I defending Israel's right to exist when no one's asking to defend Canada's right to exist or the
Yeah.
US's right or any other country for that matter.
Yeah, yeah, it is a curious position to start from. I know we're short on time here, but I wanted to maybe turn a hopeful page on this. I know that there've obviously been some developments since. I understand you were in Ottawa recently as well. So maybe you could talk a bit about what has been happening recently and maybe what you hope in the ideal scenario you would hope to see from government and leaders in your university to address this problem.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think well, first of all, I was in Ottawa yesterday, because our federal government is starting a committee hearing, the Justice Committee hearing on anti-Semitism on our university campuses. They're also doing one on Islamophobia, but they're doing, like, 2 separate hearings for it,
Sure.
and yesterday, I had the pleasure of being invited by MP Anthony Housefather to the House of Commons for a press conference where we 5 students from across the country from different campuses were able to talk about our experiences and answer questions from the press on where we see and what we want to see happen. And I thought that it's nice to have our federal government know that this is a problem from coast to coast. This isn't just a provincial university problem. This is a Canada-wide problem
Yeah.
that needs to be addressed at the federal level.
Yep.
So I'm hopeful that this will bring to light the student stories. And I think if for nothing, but hopefully actually bring change. And I hope that they have actual policies that they can suggest to university administration. I think a big issue in our universities is that they're very bureaucratic and move very slowly
Right.
and love to do what other universities in the country are doing. So I would hope that for me, I've always been an advocate for the IHRA definition to be adopted on our campuses. And I'm not sure how I've been asking for that since I was in first year law school,
Hope
much
springs
before.
eternal, right? But you're right that it is very encouraging that the federal government, some would say belatedly, but better late than never, is starting to move on this. So yes, and I'm glad that they've certainly picked a very good advocate in having you come and share your story, Sydney. So listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for doing the activism you do. I think it's very important. I think a lot of people will be applauding when they hear this podcast. Good luck with your bar exams.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. We'll catch you next time on Inside Policy Talks.